following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. Hello, listeners around the world on radio, streaming, and podcast services. This is It's Not Therapy. I'm Liana and I am not a therapist, but I am your source for navigating the madness of mental health using my top 10 sayings for checking in with your best self. This week, we're talking about dealing with unfairness. Now, last week I wasn't here because my father-in-law died, and as difficult as that inherently is, there was drama. Some people also behaved extremely badly, but I'm not going to talk about the details because some members of the family are very private and they aren't ready for that stuff to become public, and I'm respecting that. That's fair. But some of what those people did to me wasn't fair. And I want to talk about how I process that without getting into the details, because again, I'm respecting the wishes of other family who did nothing wrong. But I am hearing from a lot of people that dealing with unfairness is something they struggle with. And with not only the cost of food, the cost of rent, the cost of your mortgage going up through no fault of your own. This is just the way the economy works right now. It's not fair. You read the news. It's hard not to feel like various leaders around the world are not being fair to people who are powerless. So I want to talk about my strategies for dealing with unfairness. If you have questions, comments, concerns, anything inspired by this episode, email me at liana@nottherapyshow.com, or you can go to nottherapyshow.com, fill out the contact form, join our mailing list while you're there. It'll get to me, or you can contact me on social media. I have not been on social media much lately because too much unfairness, but you can connect with me there at Not Therapy Show on X, that's formerly Twitter, Instagram, and Threads. So unfairness. How does it affect our brains? Well, on a brain level, unfairness registers as a complex combination of punishments and rewards. That is the basics of how our basic brains basically work. Lots of basics there. I'm being goofy. Punishment, reward, on, off. That's the basics. A sense of a just world is so important to our brains because it's linked to a sense of control over what happens to us. And that sense of control inspires a feeling of safety. The biggest thing that they drill into you in trauma therapy is to only try to control the things that you can control. And that's one of these simple but not easy concepts, right? Which is why I pivoted a little bit with my top 10 phrase on the idea of control. Well, the therapists that drilled into me were right. Only try to control the things that you can control. It sucks. It feels unfair when you realize how many things are out of your control. And so I pivoted a bit more to make it more effective to me, saying healthy goals are based on things you can control. You can acknowledge that you wish you could control things, but you can't set goals based on anything but what you can control, or you're going to live in a sense of unfairness. And that's bad for your brain. Unfair treatment, until you learn to focus on the responses that you can control, not the behavior of others that you can't control, it feels terrible. The sense of unfairness is one of the worst feelings in the world. And we have the beginnings of a scientific understanding of why. Now, granted, the study most cited, if you Google this topic of what unfairness does in the brain, that study was done back in 2018. And it was conducted only on cisgender men, which, okay, as a first study, makes sense in terms of a scientific control group. But at least for me, it does create a very tantalizing desire to replicate the study with trans people and cisgender women who, you know, due to social conditioning, have very different expectations regarding being treated fairly and what's considered fair. And I couldn't see racial information collected to, indicate that part of the male participants in the group. So I'd be interested in seeing if there's a difference in reactions between, you say, white men and Black men and Latino men and Asian men. The one thing I found this really interesting. One guy in the study was disallowed for failing to take the experiment seriously, and I salute that dude for being the embodiment of sometimes the only winning move is not to play. That dude is my hero. Now, I'm already getting pretty dense with the details of this paper, and I think that's really important because when you see these headlines, a lot of science reporting regarding mental health doesn't give you these details and gives a false sense of how sure we are about this stuff. Now, that being said, I'm going to try to top line summarize what the findings were because people listen to this show while they're driving. There's still some very, very interesting starting points regarding how unfairness reads in the brain. So, during situations perceived to be fair in this all-male study, brain regions associated with self-control and social perception lit up on imaging. So fair lights up the regions of the brain connected to self-control and social perception. Now, these are fairly rational, cognitive regions of our thoughts. We have a certain amount of control here. But when unfairness hit, regions of the brain connected to emotional anticipation and reward anticipation lit up. That's really interesting, right? Something's unfair. It's like the brain holds its breath, right? The brain is bracing. Emotional responses are much stronger and happen much faster than logical ones. Now, I am oversimplifying this like mad, just because I want to get to the practical solutions, but the TLDR, that means too long didn't read. You're listening, I know. So you didn't read the study. Basically, unfairness hits our brains harder and faster than fairness. And I think we all know this. We all know this by experience, but it's nice to have some science to point to say why. And there was another interesting finding to this study based on, like I said, that emotional and reward anticipation light up to unfairness. What were the brains involved anticipating? It seems, and again, we need to do a lot more work on this. It seems like participants reacted more strongly to punishing the offenders in unfair situations, as opposed to compensating the victims of the unfairness. So people, when they experienced unfairness or saw something unfair happening, their brain went to punish the guilty, not compensate the victim, which is kind of illogical, but totally explains so much of the world right now, right? Just punish, 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 hit back, right? Retaliate, revenge. Now, the fact that the man brains, again, all male study, involved the fact that they responded to unfairness apparently by expecting some sort of punishment to follow is why I wonder if the responses would be different in women, because women are associated with the virtue of letting things go, as the recent Doctor Who holiday special demonstrated. And screw you, Russell T Davies, that's an unfair stereotype. I don't know if you watch the Doctor Who holiday special. It's very, very good. But that moment where they have mother and daughter just letting things go, twinkle, twinkle, sparkle, sparkle. This is me trying to punish Russell T Davies via public shaming that he will never hear because he wrote a thing into Doctor Who that I didn't like, and this temporarily feels good because it's what my brain wants. Of course, I immediately feel stupid now because this is a pretty impotent gesture. And so I feel worse long term because I made a fool out of myself. And now the more rational parts of my brain are engaging after a spike of emotion that feeds my brain's addiction to the anticipation and reward cycle. This is how the science of unfairness and retaliation works. Because anticipation of a reward increases the level of a brain chemical called dopamine. Now, the study that I keep referencing to, all men, one guy didn't take it seriously, so he was ejected. The researchers in that study tested the effect of oxytocin in the brain, not dopamine. Oxytocin isn't the reward chemical, it's the bonding, love, and trust chemical. So it doesn't say why they chose that I read. It was a very dense paper. But they did find that there was a difference in response when in the oxytocin group versus the no alteration control group. What the researchers found is that the group that was administered a dose of oxytocin actually meted out less severe punishments than the group that didn't get the love and trust hormone boost. Interesting, right? The oxytocin boosted group also apparently expected fair treatment more than the control group. They anticipated fairness when they had the love and trust bonding hormone. The control group did not anticipate as much fairness. They did not expect fair treatment. Now, even though the oxytocin group gave out less severe punishments than the control group, both groups preferred punishment to compensation. And that's how fairness works, right? It's not fair if someone gets away with doing bad things without punishment, even if the victim of the bad thing is compensated. If there's no punishment, the person who did it got away with it. And that's not fair, right? This is the way we work. And yet, sometimes people do get away with bad things. That's the reality of every single one of our lives. That's the reality of the world. So how do we cope with that? Despite the fact that our brains, that's not what our brains want. Our brains want justice. Our brains want the guilty punished. And we can't have that a lot of the time. I'll explore how to handle that more after the break. Questions, comments, concerns, just email me for any reason. Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Just say hi. Hi. Nottherapyshow.com. You can go to just nottherapyshow.com, fill out the contact form there, join our mailing list, or Not Therapy Show on X, that's Twitter, Instagram, and Threads. We're still going to be talking dealing with unfairness after the break on It's Not Therapy.
The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca.
We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist, still talking about how to deal with unfairness. Now, before the break, I talked about how the brain responds to unfairness, why we seek punishment, retribution, revenge when we feel treated unfairly. And I also promised you some tips about how to deal with the reality that, sometimes, in fact, more often than not, we can't directly punish the guilty. Some people will get away with doing bad things, at least in the short term. And that's not fair. And that whole thing hinges, like when I said about breaking down the science, it's about expectations. People who expect more fairness felt the need to give out less severe punishments. And that's where we're going to start in dealing with unfairness, your expectations. Because that is one thing that you can at least partially control. You may not think so, but like I said, top 10 phrase, healthy goals are based on things you can control. You set goals to set expectations. The centerpiece of PTSD, And the explanation for why people like myself with the condition seem to overreact to things, well, that's explained by that experiment I went through in the first section. People who expect fairness have a weaker response to unfairness. And people who were dosed with the love and trust hormone needed less punishment for the violation of the social norm that led to the feeling of unfairness for the brain to calm down after exposure. This seems counterintuitive, or it may seem counterintuitive at first, but it actually makes sense. If you believe that life is generally fair, then you assume that someone who does a bad thing will eventually get caught and punished. It might not happen right away, but it will happen eventually. Or they just have to live with themselves, and so the guilt that they experience is their own form of punishment. Right? That's the Zen, live and let live, trust in the Almighty attitude. But because trauma responses come from, a feeling of helplessness, realizing life's not fair, that you can't control what happens to you. You wanted something to stop and it just wouldn't stop. It just wouldn't stop no matter how much you wanted it to. The reality of the unfairness, the loss of control, it makes the human brain feel decidedly unsafe. People with trauma have no expectations of fairness, or a very weak expectation of fairness. We have no expectation of protection or safety. In fact, it's the opposite. We expect bad things to happen to us because they did. And so a lot of people with trauma have that very, very strong freeze, fight, fawn, or flight response. And many people feel like they have to scream and yell and act big to make others treat you fairly because you're not going to get it the nice way. Sound familiar? Right? This is an adrenaline response. This is the amygdala in the brain going, ah, right? And now I'm going to pivot to talking once again about, listeners of the program know I have a stalker. There's a woman who's been stalking me for, I'll conservatively say about 10 years now. I call her Stalker-chan as a cope based on the Yakuza games. There's this character that calls him in character Kiryu-chan. And so I call her Stalker-chan because it's a cope. Well, this week she's decided to take on a new persona. She's taking on the persona of a pro-Palestinian supporter, to use the fact that people are attacking me for being Jewish and therefore a filthy Zionist. She's using the horrendous death in Gaza to whip up hate against me in strangers. And somehow this stalker found out about the situation with my family. Now, it may be she just saw it through an obituary or something like that. I have no idea. She's clearly monitoring people's social media. But it's also possible she's in contact with members of my extended family. I don't know. There was some disruption in the force, right? No matter what her reasons, these tactics are dirty. They're too personal. They're petty. They're bad crazy. And most people would go, it's not fair. What she's doing is not fair. That's just wrong, right? But not to her perspective, right? She has a different story she tells herself about her experience. It doesn't match the story I tell myself about my own experiences. And the way our stories that we tell ourselves impact our behavior is very, very instructive. Top 10 phrase, don't let problems that aren't your fault lead to mistakes that are. I'm going to hit you with another top 10 phrase here. Perfect is a lie. Stop trying to be perfect. And one more, I'm going to recap these all, don't worry. Be the hero of your own story and not anyone else's. Now, in my case, with this combination of really toxic extended family, whoo boy, and Stalker-chan, two general options for a narrative here that I can tell myself. The story of the events that happened, how I chain it together. One is where I'm in control. And the people being mean to me are relatively powerless, even though they're very loud, very aggressive, and very persistent. Then there's another story where they're in control and I can't stop them from attacking me, from hurting me. And it's too bad that the taking the red pill metaphor has gotten ruined, because this is all about seeing the matrix. It's all about seeing how you can control the way bits of data connect in your mind. Because these two narratives, one where I'm in control and the people being awful or powerless, and the other where I'm helpless and they have all the power. Both stories can be told on the same set of facts. Let's start with the negative one. I am not well liked in my extended family. That's an understatement. There are certain members of my extended family who actively hate me, and they would cheer if I spontaneously combusted after being recorded naked on a particularly bloated day in public, because then I wouldn't just be dead, I would be dead, humiliated, and fat. Okay, these are not particularly mature people. So yeah, people who think this way, they're going to take every cheap shot they can. And I can't stop them from doing that. I can't control them. And I can't control if third parties believe them, either because they're gossipy and just like spilled tea, or whether they want to for some reason. You know, lies are often more exciting than the truth. These horrible extended family who think in terms of wanting people dead, they have a supervillain style role in my life, in that they're going to periodically create dramatic situations that I then have to respond to, right? That's the way superhero stories work. Villain does something, hero responds. And this is where my top 10 phrase is essential. Because I'm the hero of my story. I'm not the hero of theirs. In their story, I'm the villain. And it's very important to remember that, to tamp down the sense of incredible unfairness that I could be experiencing. Don't try to be the hero in other people's stories. Because if you start trying to play the hero in other people's stories, you'll always end up feeling like life isn't fair. Because you can't be the hero in other people's stories. And that means if you try, you'll never get the reward your brain is anticipating there. It's always going to feel unfair. You're going to feel unappreciated. Because again, think of the standard good and evil story. Villain does something bad, hero reacts and saves the day. If you're constantly trying to hit the bad guy before they hit you, you're not being the hero of the story. The villain always hits first. That's what makes them the villain. So my extended family has manufactured some narrative that I did something bad. I have no idea what this is. I have no contact with them. My mere existence is loathsome to these people. And isn't that the thinking of every supervillain out there? You know, the Joker needs to do something to hurt Batman. Why? Reasons. You know, Lex Luthor needs to do something to lash out at Superman. Often they depict Lex Luthor of being jealous of the attention and accolades that Superman, receives. But the villain always has a reason. The reasons don't make them the villain. What they do with those reasons does. So if I try to make myself the hero of the story of the people who hate me, I end up doing something because I gotta get them before they get me. I have to, end run them. I start thinking like the Joker. I start thinking like Lex Luthor. I need to do something. And then I become a legit villain, right? And why do I feel the need to do something? The reason every supervillain needs to do something, to get something back. Something was taken to them that they have to get back no matter what. So they exist, so they matter. And so they blow something up to get the story moving. And, we talked about the science of this. It's not just an excuse. It becomes an imperative. When the brain feels like something unjust has happened, it is addicted to punishing the guilty. And so something in their brains meant I needed to be punished. When, again, the reality is that I haven't said a word to some of these people in 10 years. That's bad, crazy thinking, right? But this is what happens when you try to be the hero in other people's stories. You take the first shot, and so you end up being the villain. Being the hero of your own story and not anybody else's is about the importance of recognizing when it's not about you. When you can just not so much ignore it, but just see it, recognize it for what it is, supervillain move. You don't have to respond. You can be like Superman with the bullets bouncing off his chest going, that tickles, right? And that's where we lead into don't let problems that aren't your fault lead to mistakes that are. Come in, right? My extended family, the stalker, other people, the people hate watching this podcast because they can't stand me merely for existing. Hi, thanks for the traffic. Are trying to bait me into reacting and therefore participating in that cycle of unfairness and punishment that our brains are addicted to. But because I understand the neuroscience of that, and an addiction, some people are going to say, it's not really an addiction. It's the center of the brain that's associated with addiction. There you go. For the scientists listening, I was specific, okay? Because I understand the science behind these reactions, I'm going to be that one guy in the study I talked about who refused to take it seriously and was therefore eliminated from the results, right? Only winning move is not to play. If I don't respond, the only words or behaviors that onlookers have to judge is that of the people who can't stand me. It's the tactic Sophie Turner used in the ugly PR fight against Joe Jonas during their divorce and the custody stuff. She just didn't respond. She let all the attention go on him and his surrogates because people watching are going to go, well, somebody's lying here. Somebody's doing something unfair to somebody else. And then their brains want to punish the guilty more than they want to compensate the wronged. So all you have to do is nothing while the other side keeps talking. They keep acting. They keep providing bait. And eventually they'll create conditions where they're fighting a battle against themselves because they keep giving observers things to judge and therefore punish. And this is when the brain starts going, but they get to tell their side and I don't. Everybody's brain does this. I am not a Zen master on this. Okay, I fight down this feeling too. It's totally true. But remember, the third top 10 phrase I mentioned, perfect is a lie. Stop trying to be perfect, right? Remember, people's brains prioritize punishment of the transgressor over compensation of the victim. Our lizard brains are looking to find a target to throw sticks and rocks at because that produces more of a biochemical reward than consoling the person who was wronged. If you tell your side, right, because it's not fair that you don't get to. Every word you utter becomes a potential mistake and therefore a potential target for a thrown rock. That's why the right to remain silent and not self-incriminate is a thing. I find that letting the extended family and stalker continue to take shots at me means they have more opportunities to make mistakes. I put out a short thing. It's not true. I don't know where they're getting this from. They keep going. Every time they miss, every time they make a mistake, I win. They're fighting hard, not smart. That seems like a much more fair paradigm. The story I have created seems much more fair to me than being sure that if I don't hit back, people are just going to believe them. It's all about the story you tell yourself. and remembering you're the hero of your own story. You're not the villain. It's your own story. It's yours. No one can take that from you. And people are noticing. People have noticed inconsistencies, impossibilities, things that are flat out wrong and petty. Of course, this just makes the people who hate me more, because their narrative is that I made them do all the petty things. They're the victim. I'm the villain. They had to respond. The very reaction I'm telling you to fight down. Be still. Recognize it for what it is. It's your brain leading you astray. Not because you're bad crazy. Because the brain wants to punish, not console. And, them blaming me for everything, that's fine. Again, I may be the villain in their story. I'm the hero in mine. And, let's face it, when third parties are watching them constantly yell the equivalent of, "Curse you, He-Man!" it's pretty clear they're playing the role of Skeletor, right? I mean, Skeletor's awesome. Skeletor's cool, right? But the Skeletor in every story, the Skeletor in every story loses. The purpose of Skeletor is to be cool, then lose, and yell, "Curse you, He-Man!" in anguish, like that's the way those stories go. Because then the audience feels maximum dopamine release, because Skeletor's not just being punished for being a jerk. The punishment hurts. It feels fair. We get the punishment, right? The wisdom of those clunky cartoons aimed at 6 to 10-year-old boys is that, okay, there's a part of every grown man's brain that's 6 to 10 years old, right? I have that little boy inside me. I don't know about you. Girls' cartoons are different. What about women, right? I'm sure people think about, why is it all men? Well, yeah, that's a good teaser, because again, the study that we have to go on, all the participants were men. How does being the hero of your own story apply to Girl World, where gossip, backstabbing, and frenemies reign supreme? I'm going to talk about that after the break. Stay tuned. If you want personalized support making those connections, Liana at nottherapyshow.com, or go to the website, nottherapyshow.com, fill out the contact form, join the mailing list while you're there, or you can go to social media, Not Therapy Show on X, that's Twitter, Instagram, and Threads. We're going to be back being the hero of Girl World when things are unfair on It's Not Therapy.
The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca.
We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kirstner. I'm still not a therapist, and we're still talking dealing with unfairness. Okay, promise before the break. Dealing with unfairness, being a hero or heroine, if you will, in girl world, in woman world, where virtue reigns supreme over strength, even though we claim to put strong women on pedestals. Here's the thing about being put on pedestals, ladies. We're taught from the time we're a little girl, you want people to put you up on the pedestal and tell you you're wonderful and special and above it all, right? But when you're put on a pedestal, you will always eventually get knocked off. Because the minute you're not perfect, down you go. And top 10 phrase, perfect is a lie. Stop trying to be perfect. When dealing with truly terrible people, it's not a question of if they're going to do something petty and nasty. It's a question of when. The reason I'm curious to see the scientific unfairness experiments replicated with women instead of men is because by the time the average person assigned female at birth reaches the 7th or 8th grade, none of us expects life to be fair, right? We expect to lose. We expect to be stabbed in the back. We expect friends to turn on us because we've been ostracized by some social group for some teeny tiny transgression. And nobody asked us why we did it. Nobody asked our side just be gone, right? Society's especially terrible to women in this regard. I don't care what anybody says. It is worse in this way. Men have it worse in other ways. Women have it worse this way. Because the tropes we assign to women are so narrow. When unfairness happens, you're either stuck being a damsel in distress where other people are fighting your battles so you retain your innocence, right? Or you have to be perfect while fighting your own battles. And you can't be perfect. No one can be perfect. Perfect is a lie. Stop trying to be perfect. And the people tormenting you are going to leverage the there are no perfect victims thing, right? We have heard again and again and again in the media by domestic violence advocates, there's no such thing as a perfect victim. And yeah, that's true. But too many tormentors leverage the no perfect victims thing against the person they're tormenting. So the tormentors can paint themselves as the victim if the target so much as farts in their general direction, right? I think that was a Monty Python quote. Bad people with bad intentions, or people who are instinctively vicious, co-opt these things that are true. And that is everywhere in girl world. Every woman who is conscious knows this, which is why I suspect that the brain scans of women, if we did the unfairness experiments on women, would show a difference. It may be, well, if we follow the results, because unfairness is expected, we would see off the charts desire for punishment of transgressors. Like, oh no, women don't lash out. We just let it go. No, I expect that's just repression. That women would just be, no, punish, murder, death, kill, right? Right? Because I don't know of a single adult woman who expects life to be at all fair. Perhaps some of you ladies exist. More power to you. Great. I wish I knew you. I don't know any. I don't know any woman who expects life to be fair. Which is why women fight dirty. Really dirty. Indirectly, often through proxies. And conflicts involving women get a unique kind of messy. Even if the active primary conflict is done by men defending their woman's honor, right? Because we've all seen women egg on guys there, right? And they weren't doing the direct thing, therefore no one's accountable for anything. We've all seen it, and so it's a common assumption. It's like the number of people who believe that Jada Pinkett Smith told Will Smith to go up and smack Chris Rock. Like, there's absolutely zero evidence for this, but we so assume that women are fighting proxy battles because, let's face it, it's normalized behavior, and that's not okay. Under this system, no one's actually accountable for anything. Everything else is somebody else's fault. In this scenario, the women are acting as damsels in distress, even though they're actually instigators, and men are trying to be the hero of those women's stories. Which is why if you stop trying to be the hero of somebody else's story, if you say, I'm going to be your sidekick and I'll be there Samwise Gamgee style carrying you while you carry it, these what we call alternative or relational aggressions, these things stop, okay? Don't be the hero in another person's story, especially you fellas. Just don't, okay? In my extended family, I saw this all the time. There would be a disagreement between two women and the men in their lives would leap in to act big and stop the conflict, but that just created a secondary conflict and never solved the first one. Not only are the men not helping here, but they're increasing the sense of helplessness, sense of unfairness in the women involved. Because now the fight's expanded. The women can't stop it, and the whole thing feels unfair. Now, I'm not saying this happens everywhere. I'm saying this was the dynamic I observed in my family. During the recent drama in my family, extended family pulled a cheap shot where I was seemingly the target, but it's very likely that the ultimate goal was to bait my husband into responding, because that's what every other man in the family would do. Petty, right? And I was expecting that, because remember, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. When you're the villain in someone else's story, they have to be the hero in yours of everything, and so they act like the villain. So once I found out what the supervillain was going to do, it was actually a relief. I can stop wondering now where the dirty move is coming, right? I knew they couldn't help themselves. That was the expectation. That was the anticipation. Finding out the shape and size of what they were going to do, my brain rewarded that. Anticipation, reward. See how I brain hacked that? See how I broke the cycle of the unfairness reaction through my expectations? And this is not an invitation to catastrophize. Quite the opposite. The story I told myself was not, oh my God, they're going to attack me and bully me and there's nothing I can do about it. The story was, they're going to do something petty. And if you don't react and you don't add fuel to the fire, they're the ones that are going to look bad. See how the first scenario seems unfair to me and the other scenario seems totally fair because the guilty are punished? That's what being the hero of your own story is all about. Don't let problems that aren't your fault lead to mistakes that are. Don't give away your power by letting other people make you do things. Now, I'm not saying this is easy. I'm saying it's worthwhile. Not reacting when people are taking obvious shots takes a lot of practice. You will screw it up in the first, in my case, at least 50 times. Now, we're going to take one more break. I'm going to come back, talk very briefly, because we're running out of time, about how to control your own behavior in unfair situations. Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com. Fill out the contact form. Join our mailing list. Not Therapy Show on Twitter, Instagram, and Threads. We'll be back.
The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca.
We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist, and we are still talking, dealing with unfairness. Before the break, I promised you to talk about how to stop that need to punish, how to put the brakes on so you stay the hero of your own story and don't become the villain. Before the last break, I talked about the absolutely brutal reality that in controlling what you can control in unfair situations, the only thing you can really control is your own reactions. This brutal reality can also be an empowering one. In order to control your behavior, this may sound counterintuitive at first, but hear me out. In order to control your behavior, you need to stop attempting to control your feelings. First step, let yourself feel the anger. If you need to, do the Sith Lord thing from Star Wars and let the hate flow through you. You know, like just let it flow. Let it flow. Until you feel the overwhelming urge to pick up the lightsaber and start slicing things with it. That's exactly what you don't want to do. Stay still while you let the hate flow through you, right? Yoda, there's no try, do or do not. Like, do not here. Like, just do not. Because a sense of unfairness can make us bad crazy. Because, as I've pointed out the entire show, science tells us when things are unfair, we want to punish the guilty. So it's very important to make sure that we only punish the guilty. Because if we make a mistake and punish an innocent party, then we're being unfair, and then people have the right to punish us. So this is a time when no sudden moves is best, even though our brain is screaming at us to do something. Being a human is great, isn't it? Yeah. Now, if you do lose it, don't beat yourself up, okay? Top 10 phrase, self-esteem cannot exist without self-compassion. Everyone has a breaking point. The question is, are you taking steps to back away from your breaking point, or are you racing towards it? This is where a lot of people go wrong dealing with unfair things. Most people do bad happy math in these equations. They assign too much value on I'm not going to be kept from doing things. And not enough value on, I don't want to be put in a situation where I look like the bad guy. Long story short, if you're not sure you can keep it together, don't push yourself into situations where you seem like the bad, crazy one. No single social event is worth being painted as the one who lost their cool around people who didn't see the exciting incident. You will forget. They won't. Because bystanders expect perfection because they're looking to punish. And you're not going to be perfect, especially when you feel like you've been wronged. This was a hard thing for me to learn. Learn from my mistakes, please. It felt cowardly at first as opposed to smart. And I ended up in too many situations where I blew up because I was scared and it felt like me against the world. It felt unfair. It felt unwinnable. And I lost that round because science has shown that people are judgy jerks at the level of brain chemistry, right? So now I expect to be judged. Because I understand why the brain works, the judgments feel fairer. So when people judge me unfairly because someone manipulated the situation, I just say, please show me charity and give me the benefit of the doubt because there's information here you don't know. God, have I been saying that a lot lately. But it's been effective. I've trained myself to give benefit of the doubt to a lot of people when my instinct was to punish, and it goes so much better. And when you get a good result, it feeds the sense that you can expect fairness eventually. It's about playing the long game. Short-term outcomes tend to be very, very different than the long-term ones. And if you can get past the temporary small losses in public opinion in, your immediate circle, you can achieve the longer-term, bigger wins. And it all comes down to recognizing brain science and the reality that no one's perfect. So, if the person torturing you keeps attacking anyone that gets in their way, and you don't, they're punishing innocent people. And those people's brains are going to find that unfair. Unfairness creates a desire for punishment, so the people who are torturing you will eventually get punished. They may even already be getting it, just in a way that you can't see. Yes, the brain wants to see. I know, but still, stay out of the way. Don't interrupt them when they're making a mistake. Be the hero of your own story. Don't succumb to bitterness. And I have to succumb to time on this show. So thanks so much for listening. Liana at nottherapyshow.com, nottherapyshow.com. Join the mailing list at nottherapyshow on Twitter, Instagram. There's going to be some disruptions for the holidays coming up. I'm not quite sure when they are yet, so bear with me. Nobody's perfect. Thanks for watching, and remember, you're crazy is only a problem if it's hurting you. Talk soon.